The night was quiet, the city lights reflecting off the sleek black luxury car as it cruised down the street. Inside, Captain Lisa Monroe, a high-ranking officer with over 15 years on the force, was on her way home after a long shift. She had spent the day overseeing a community outreach program, something she was passionate about, building trust between law enforcement and the people they served. But tonight, she was about to experience firsthand the very issue she had dedicated her career to fixing. As she pulled up to a red light, flashing blue and red lights suddenly filled her rearview mirror. A patrol car. Lisa's brow furrowed. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't run a light, hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she calmly signaled and pulled over, her training kicking in. But as soon as the officer stepped out of his vehicle, she could tell this wasn't going to be a routine stop. Officer Ryan Carter had been with the department for 3 years, young, eager, and full of authority, but not in the way a good cop should be. He had a reputation, one Lisa had heard whispers about but had never seen for herself. He approached her car with a hardened expression, one hand resting on his belt. License and registration, he barked before she could even greet him. Lisa, keeping her voice steady, reached for her purse. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" Carter's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the luxury car's interior, then back at Lisa, as if trying to put a puzzle together that didn't quite fit. "Just hand over your license," he snapped. Lisa exhaled slowly, keeping her composure. She had been in situations like this before, not as a suspect, but as someone who had investigated complaints about officers like Carter. Still, she complied, handing over her ID. The moment Carter saw her name, something changed. His jaw tightened. His grip on her license lingered just a second too long. But instead of backing down, he made a decision that would change his career forever. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Lisa's heart pounded. This was beyond a simple traffic stop now. She knew she had 2 choices: go along with his abuse of power or reveal who she really was. But before she could speak, Carter reached for his cuffs. And that's when everything took a shocking turn. Lisa felt the cold steel of the cuffs brush against her wrist, but she didn't resist. Not yet. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way Carter carried himself, firm, unshaken, convinced he had control. She had seen this kind of behavior before, officers who thrived on intimidation, who made assumptions without facts. And now she was in the center of it. "Sir, I need you to tell me why I'm being detained," Lisa said, her voice measured but firm. Carter smirked. "Suspicion of stolen property," he said, nodding toward her car. "Nice ride. You want to tell me how you got it?" Lisa inhaled deeply, steadying herself. It wasn't the first time someone had looked at her dark skin, her confidence, her success, and assumed she didn't belong. But this wasn't just any random person. This was a fellow officer, one who should have known better. "Stolen property," she repeated, keeping her composure. "Officer Carter, I strongly suggest you run my information before making accusations." But Carter wasn't listening. He was already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a suspect in custody." "Need a unit for transport," he said, his tone sharp, decisive. Lisa could feel her pulse in her ears. This was escalating fast. Too fast, and Carter had no idea who he was dealing with. As he tightened his grip on the cuffs, a second patrol car pulled up. The officer inside stepped out, his expression neutral at first, until he got a good look at Lisa. His face shifted from indifference to something else entirely. Recognition. "Captain Monroe," he blurted out, eyes widening. Lisa turned her head slightly, her badge still hidden from sight, but she didn't respond. She wanted to see what Carter would do next. Carter hesitated for just a moment, his confidence cracking. He looked between Lisa and the other officer, clearly confused. "You know her?" he asked. The second officer swallowed hard. "Yeah, I know her. That's Captain Lisa Monroe." His voice was lower now, tense. "She's been on the force longer than both of us combined." For the first time, Carter looked uncertain. He glanced at Lisa, the cuffs still loosely around her wrist, realization sinking in. But before he could react, Lisa spoke, this time with authority. "You're going to want to uncuff me," she said, locking eyes with him. "Now." Carter's face paled, but his hands remained frozen. The night had taken a turn he hadn't expected, and it was about to get worse. Carter's grip on the cuffs remained tight, but his confidence was slipping. He could feel the weight of the second officer's stare, the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. His mind raced, trying to find a way out, but there was none. He had made a mistake, a big one. Lisa didn't move. She let the silence stretch between them, watching Carter's reaction closely. Would he double down, try to justify what he'd done, or would he accept that he'd just put himself in a position he couldn't walk away from? The second officer, Davis, cleared his throat. "Carter, I think you should listen to her." His voice was careful, but there was an urgency behind it. Carter hesitated for a second longer before finally reaching for the key. The cuffs clicked open, and Lisa pulled her wrist back, rubbing the spot where the metal had pressed into her skin. Her face remained calm, unreadable, but inside, she was already piecing everything together. She could have let it go right there. Could have walked away, let Carter drown in his own guilt. But she wasn't just a cop, she was a leader. And leaders didn't ignore problems. They faced them head-on. Lisa turned to Davis. "Call the watch commander, now." Carter's head snapped up. "That's not necessary." "Excuse me," Lisa interrupted, her voice sharp now. "You detained a law-abiding citizen, failed to state a valid reason, and attempted to escalate a situation that never should have happened. And now you're telling me what's necessary." Carter's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. Davis pulled out his radio, stepping aside to make the call. Lisa turned back to Carter. "Tell me, Officer Carter," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less intense. "How many times have you done this before?" Carter's jaw tightened. "I was doing my job." "Was that your job? Assuming guilt based on nothing but the car I drive." His silence was answer enough. Moments later, another patrol car arrived, this time carrying the watch commander, Lieutenant Harris. A seasoned officer, Harris stepped out, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. He looked at Lisa, then at Carter, then back at Lisa again. "What's going on here?" he asked. Lisa folded her arms. "That's exactly what I'd like to know." And just like that, the night wasn't over. It was just getting started. Lieutenant Harris took a slow step forward, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. Lisa could see the flicker of recognition in his expression. He knew who she was. But instead of addressing her directly, he turned to Carter. "Officer Carter, what's the situation here?" Harris asked, his voice steady but firm. Carter hesitated, shifting on his feet. He had been so sure of himself minutes ago, but now, under the weight of the lieutenant's gaze, his confidence was crumbling. "I pulled over this vehicle under suspicion of stolen property," he said quickly. The driver was uncooperative. Lisa felt a slow burn in her chest. Uncooperative. She had asked a simple question, requested basic information about why she was stopped, something every citizen had the right to do. Harris turned his head slightly toward Lisa. "Captain Monroe, is that accurate?" Lisa didn't look at Carter when she answered. "No, Lieutenant, it's not." Her voice was measured, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. "I asked why I was being stopped." Instead of answering, Officer Carter escalated the situation. "He didn't run my plates before making accusations. He didn't verify my license before calling for backup. He made an assumption and acted on it." Harris exhaled through his nose, his lips pressing together. Lisa could see the weight of the situation settling on him. This wasn't just a bad stop. This was an officer who had let his biases dictate his actions. And the worst part, it wasn't the first time. Davis shifted uncomfortably. He had stayed quiet, but now he spoke up. "Lieutenant, I recognized Captain Monroe the second I saw her. I tried to tell Carter, but he trailed off, his eyes darting to his partner. Harris nodded, his face unreadable. Then he turned back to Carter. Did you run her plates? Carter's throat bobbed. I was about to. Before or after you put her in cuffs? Harris' voice was sharper now. The weight of the question hung in the air. Lisa could see the panic creeping into Carter's face, the realization that there was no way out of this, no excuse he could make. A tense silence followed. The street was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. And then, just when the tension couldn't get any thicker, Harris reached for his radio. Lisa didn't look away. She knew what was coming next. Carter did too. This wasn't just about one bad stop anymore. This was about something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored. Harris brought the radio to his lips, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the night. That won't be necessary. Everyone turned as a dark SUV rolled up to the scene, its tinted windows gleaming under the streetlights. The door opened, and out stepped Deputy Chief Alan Briggs. Lisa's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected this to go so high up so fast. Briggs was an old-school cop, the kind who didn't like problems making their way to his desk. If he was here, it meant this situation had already caught the wrong kind of attention, and judging by the tight look on his face, he wasn't happy about it. Harris lowered the radio. Chief, I. Briggs lifted a hand, silencing him. His eyes swept over the scene, pausing on Lisa. Captain Monroe, he said, his voice calm but weighted. Are you all right? Lisa nodded. I'm fine, but the tension in her jaw told a different story. Briggs turned to Carter, his expression unreadable. And you? Carter straightened his shoulders, trying to regain some of the authority he had lost. I was conducting a routine stop, sir. Briggs stared at him for a long moment before exhaling through his nose. Is that so? His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. Lisa watched the shift happen in real time. Carter had thought he was in control of this situation, but now, standing in front of a deputy chief and a lieutenant, with his actions being questioned, reality was hitting him hard. Then Briggs did something no one expected. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. A video began playing. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. It was footage, clear, high-definition footage, of the entire traffic stop. From the moment Carter had approached her car to the second he had tried to cuff her. Every word, every action captured from multiple angles. Carter's face drained of color. Lisa's mind raced. Who had filmed this? Was it a bystander? Someone monitoring police activity? Or was it something else? Briggs let the video play a few seconds longer before lowering the phone. This was sent to me 20 minutes ago, he said, his voice sharp. And now it's spreading. Lisa knew what that meant. This wasn't just about one officer's bad decision anymore. This was about public perception, department accountability, and a situation spiraling out of control. And the worst part, it wasn't over yet. Carter stood frozen, his eyes locked on the phone in Briggs' hand. The weight of the situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't just an internal issue anymore. This was public. The kind of public that couldn't be covered up or ignored. Lisa didn't look away. She wanted to see it, the exact moment Carter realized his career was hanging by a thread. But before she could speak, Briggs slid his phone into his pocket and turned to her. I need you to come with me, he said, his tone unreadable. Lisa's brows lifted slightly. Excuse me. Briggs glanced at Harris and Davis. Clear the scene, now. Harris hesitated but gave a quick nod, signaling Davis to step back. Carter, still rattled, stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight Lisa thought it might crack. He didn't dare say a word. Lisa straightened, crossing her arms. With all due respect, Chief, I have every right to be here. I was the one unlawfully detained. Briggs exhaled sharply, his voice lowering. I understand that, but there's more going on here than you realize. Lisa narrowed her eyes. More. Briggs didn't answer. Instead, he motioned toward the SUV. "We need to talk, off the record." Lisa hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust the situation, but there was something in Briggs' face, something she'd never seen before. Concern, and maybe even fear. Reluctantly, she followed him to the SUV, sliding into the passenger seat. The moment the doors closed, Briggs turned to her. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "That video, it didn't come from a bystander. It came from inside the department." Lisa's pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" Briggs rubbed his temples. "Someone in our own ranks leaked this footage, and they didn't just send it to me, they sent it to the press." Lisa's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about Carter anymore. This was bigger. Someone inside the department had been watching, waiting for the right moment to expose what was happening. But why now? And who was behind it? Briggs looked at her, his expression grim. "This isn't just about one bad cop, Monroe. This is about the entire system. And whoever sent that video, they want to burn it all down." Lisa stared ahead, the weight of his words settling over her. She had thought this night was ending. But it was only just beginning. Lisa sat in silence, staring out the windshield, the city lights blurring together as her mind raced. The video hadn't been an accident. Someone had planned this, waited for the right moment to reveal the truth, and now there was no stopping it. She turned to Briggs. "Do you know who sent it?" Briggs shook his head. "Not yet. But whoever it is, they're sending a message. They want change, and they're willing to force it." Lisa exhaled slowly. Change. That was what she had been fighting for her entire career. But change didn't come easy. It came with resistance, with consequences. And now someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes, using this moment to push a bigger agenda. Briggs leaned forward, his voice low. "This department has cracks, Monroe. Deep ones. I need to know. Are you ready for what's coming?" Lisa didn't answer right away. Instead, she thought about Carter, about the officers who had stood by and watched, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. She thought about the people who didn't have a badge, who dealt with situations like this every day with no one to speak up for them. She turned back to Briggs, her expression unwavering. "I've been ready." Briggs studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good." He started the car, but before he could pull away, Lisa reached for the door handle. "I'm not going home," she said. "I need to handle this." Briggs didn't argue. He knew as well as she did, this wasn't over. Stepping out of the SUV, Lisa walked back toward the patrol cars. Harris was speaking with Davis, but they both turned when they saw her. Carter stood off to the side, his face pale, his confidence long gone. Lisa stopped in front of him, her voice calm but firm. "You have a choice to make, Officer Carter. You can keep pretending this was just a mistake, or you can face what really happened here." Carter swallowed hard, looking away. He had no words. Lisa didn't need to hear them. She turned and walked away, knowing this night had changed everything. The truth was out now, and no matter how much some people wanted to bury it, there was no going back. The system had been exposed, and Lisa, she wasn't going to stop until something finally changed.